Sodom and Gomorrah were the most prosperous cities in the Jordan plain. Abundant water, rich trade, routes, everything a civilization could desire, and they desired too much. Genesis 18. The Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is very great, and their sin is very grave. I will go down to see. A divine investigation is coming." This is Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis chapters 18 and 19. The most dramatic divine judgment in Genesis, and the mercy hidden inside it. What was the sin of Sodom? Ezekiel gives the answer: pride, excess food, and prosperous ease. They did not aid the poor and needy, and they committed abominations before God. Before the judgment, God told Abraham what he was about to do, and Abraham, remarkably, began to argue with God on behalf of the righteous in the city. What if there are 50 righteous, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10, Abraham counting down, God agreeing every time, the mercy embedded in the negotiation. For the sake of 10 righteous people, God agreed not to destroy. But there were not 10. There was one righteous household, and barely that. Lot had chosen to live in Sodom. He sat at the city gate, a position of authority and status. He had found success there and stayed too long. 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening. Lot saw them from the gate and immediately invited them to his home. He knew what the streets of Sodom were like at night. Before they lay down, all the men of the city surrounded the house, young and old, all the people to the last man, demanding that Lot send his guests out. The sin of the city made total. Lot went out and shut the door behind him. He tried to negotiate with the mob. He was a man trying to do the right thing with a moral compass warped by years in Sodom. The angels pulled Lot back inside and struck the men outside with blindness, and the men wore themselves out trying to find the door and could not. The first act of divine protection. The angels said, "Whom else do you have here? Get them out of this place, for we are about to destroy it." The outcry against this city has come to a point, the order given. Lot warned his sons-in-law, "Get up and leave this place." But he seemed to them to be jesting. They laughed. They did not believe him. They stayed. They died. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, "Arise, take your wife and your daughters." He lingered. So the angels seized his hand and brought him out. The mercy of the Lord was upon him. Escape for your life. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills lest you be swept away. The condition of salvation. Keep moving forward. Lot said, "I cannot reach the hills in time. Let me escape to this small city instead." And God agreed. Even inside the judgment, God makes room for the imperfect prayer. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The skies opened. The cities ceased to exist. He overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants and everything that grew on the ground. Everything, total and complete, nothing remained. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. The most haunting image in Genesis, a woman stopped between salvation and destruction by a single backward glance. Why not look back? Because Sodom was her home, her friends, her life. Looking back was not curiosity. It was the refusal to completely leave what God had said to leave behind. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. When God destroyed the cities, he remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. The rescue of Lot was the answer to Abraham's intercession. Lot was afraid to stay in Zoar. He went up into the hills and lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. From the most prosperous city in the valley to a cave, the ark of a wrong choice. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is referenced in the New Testament more times than any other Old Testament event except the flood. The memory endures. Archaeologists have identified Tel El Hammam in Jordan as a strong candidate for Sodom, a site where evidence of a massive, sudden, catastrophic destruction event has been found. The judgment of Sodom was not random. It was the answer to an outcry. Someone was crying out, and God heard. The judgment was the justice that answered the oppressed. Wait, if God is all-merciful, why destroy an entire city? Why not just fix the people? Why is judgment ever the answer? Rain falls over 10s. In one part of the frame it destroys, in another it nourishes. The same rain, the same act, 2 different experiences of. Lot escaped, not because he deserved it. Peter says God rescued Lot, a righteous man greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. His righteousness was tormented, not triumphant. Abraham had asked, "What if there are 10 righteous?" There weren't 10, but there was one household, barely, and God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out. The prayer worked beyond what was asked. Jesus said, "Remember Lot's wife." 2 words that have echoed across 2,000 years, the warning against looking back at what God has called you to leave. What was she leaving behind? Her home, her friends, her life, her daughters' families, the city where she had built everything. The backward glance was grief, not just disobedience. Obedience always costs something. The question is whether what you are walking toward is worth what you are leaving behind. Lot's wife decided it was not, and she was wrong. Centuries later, a Moabite woman named Ruth would say to her Israelite mother-in-law, "Your people shall be my people, your God my God." The nation born from the cave becomes part of the promise. The word Sodom has entered every major language as a moral warning. What began in 9 verses of Genesis has shaped law, ethics, and moral vocabulary for 3,000 years. Jesus referenced Sodom more than any other prophet. It is more tolerable on the day of judgment for Sodom than for a city that hears the gospel and rejects it. The comparison is sobering. Before the fire fell, God told Abraham. Before Lot was swept away, angels came to warn him. Before the destruction was complete, the righteous were removed. God said, "I will go down to see whether they have done altogether as the outcry to me." God came down to investigate personally. This is a God who does not judge from distance. For the sake of 10 righteous people, God would have spared the entire city, 10 out of tens of thousands. The standard for mercy was not perfection, just 10. Abraham interceded for people who were not his family, not his tribe, for people whose sins were famous. The model of intercession. You advocate for those you cannot control. Every generation since has had the story of Sodom as a warning. not primarily about sexuality, but about the complete failure of a society to care for the vulnerable, shows a sudden Bronze Age destruction horizon consistent with an extremely high-temperature event, around 1650 BC, melted pottery, incinerated skeletons, sudden abandonment. The Jordan Plain was described as like the garden of the Lord. After the destruction, the Bible describes it as a wasteland of salt and burning sulfur. The most fertile land became the most desolate. The sons-in-law were warned. They had the same information as Lot, the same invitation to escape. They thought it was a joke. They were wrong. The warning is only useful if you move. Jesus said, "Remember Lot's wife." Not, "Be glad she was punished." Not, "She deserved it." Just, remember. The memory is the warning. The memory is the mercy. The word sodomy has entered English and many other languages. 3,000 years after the event, the city names still function as moral vocabulary, the most enduring legacy. From Lot's son Moab came the Moabites, and centuries later, Ruth the Moabite, whose faithfulness put her in the lineage of David and ultimately of Jesus himself. The cave became a royal line. In all the story of Sodom, one thing is constant. The mercy came before the fire. The warning was sent. The escape was provided. The door was open until the moment it closed. The sin of Sodom was not only what they did to the angels. Ezekiel says the deeper sin was the failure of abundance, prosperity without compassion, excess without generosity. Every prosperous civilization has been asked the same question Sodom was asked. What do you do with your excess? The answer to that question has always determined the future. The story of Sodom ends with mercy at work. Lot escaped. Abraham's prayer was remembered. Ruth would come. The lineage continues. The judgment did not have the last word. The story begins with an outcry that reached heaven. The story ends with that outcry answered. The God of Genesis is a God who hears the cry of the oppressed and acts. The fire fell on the cities, but the story of grace did not end there. Ruth the Moabite, descendant of Lot, carried the promise forward. Judgment never has the last word in Genesis. From Babel to Sodom, the pattern is the same. Judgment comes, but mercy comes first. Escape is always offered before the fire falls. The pattern reveals the character of God. What comes next in this family? 2 brothers, 1 birthright, 1 bowl of soup, and a deception that divided a nation. That is next.